So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Jessica Rasmussen from Two Magnolias this afternoon. Jessica, welcome to Talking Frankly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So for those who are listening today and may have not heard of Two Magnolias, can you tell us a little bit about the business?
Yes, of course. Well, Two Magnolias is a venture capital fund. It was started by myself and my co-founder, Marie. Both of us spun out of banking, actually, in 2019. And we were thinking about what to do next. And we were always focused on private markets. We were thinking about investing our own capital, which we did for a couple of years. And then we realized there was a huge gap in the market for female-led VCs, but also VCs that were focused on early stage businesses in the UK and VCs that were focused on sort of minority founders or underrepresented founders. So when all those three stars collided, Marie and I decided, look, we're going to do this and we're going to do this ourselves. So we started Two Magnolias in 2021. We did a first close on our first fund in 2022. And we did a final close in 2024. So we're absolutely delighted with the progress to date.
Amazing. And, you just mentioned there your co-founder, Marie. How did you both meet? And was there a point when you realised we're going to launch a business together?
Yeah, well, Marie and I met when we were at Bank of America. And so we were colleagues and friends first. We worked together for 6 years. I was already there. But by the time I left, I'd been there 10 years. But Marie and I worked together for 6 years. We were on the same team for a little while. Then we were sort of on different teams. But we definitely clicked. And what happened was Marie was originally a North London girl. And then she moved to South London. Rarely happens, but she moved to South London towards Wimbledon, which is where I'm based, at, the sort of time when we were both thinking of a career change or moving out of what we were doing. We'd both been in global markets for many, many years. We have combined 50 years of experience in trading rooms of one form or another. And so by the time I came to sort of retire from what I was doing and Marie left for different reasons, we were both living sort of fairly locally in Southwest London. And so once that happened, we used to meet regularly and we used to think about what we were going to do. And it's very interesting. Doing nothing was never an option.
Yeah.
And I was, we were at different we are at different stages, and that my two sons are Gen Zs and they are older, and at that time there was sort of, my eldest was at uni and my younger one was going through sort of senior school. But Marie has Gen Alpha kids, so she has got young kids. So, we were at different stages, yet neither of us said doing nothing was an option. So we decided that we would collaborate. And one of the things that we knew that we had was we were fortunate enough to have a little bit of capital because obviously we'd had long careers in banking. But what we didn't have was this sort of, we weren't going to launch an app. We weren't going to, we didn't have a sort of technical background where we were building like a deep tech platform or anything like that. So we knew that the power that we had was we could influence outcomes with a little bit of capital.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of joint collective thought that we both had, that, we could do things quickly by sort of combining the power of our capital.
And it's amazing, I think, how, and in prepping for today, the impact, how impact-led you are. And as a business, that's a real focus for you. Now that you're kind of well into your second fund and raising capital for that at the moment, what's been the biggest challenge for as a business that you've kind of faced since launching?
The challenges are many. I mean, the biggest challenge, which we find quite amusing, and Marie and I talk about it on different stages at different events, is that although as two senior women in banking, we had a combined sort of 50 years, as I said, in different banks, international investment banks, US banks. Marie worked at two fund managers at Legal & General and F&C. When we came into venture capital and we decided to come into venture capital, we were reset to zero. So the VC market and the environment is very opaque, actually. Even though we had a huge career in financial services, this tiny sliver of financial services is a little bit of a club. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. Now, things are changing, and there's a huge amplification of different voices in venture capital, particularly in the UK now. It's really like a fast-growing startup ecosystem, which we're delighted to be part of. But when we first started, we were reset to zero. So people would say to us, well, but you don't know anything. We were like, we just came out of, 50 years of banking. We do know one or two things. But it was really interesting. So that sort of rhetoric and that discussion tripped us up a little bit. Because and I don't know if it's a female thing. I think it probably is. We started to have imposter syndrome very quickly. We thought we don't belong in this space, etc. And then we realised actually we can write our own rules. And what we decided to do was we weren't going to go and knock on 100 VC doors and say, look, we've got a fantastic idea. We know where the gaps are. This is a fantastic returns-driven opportunity. We knew that we had to do it ourselves. No one was going to give us a lift up. No one was going to elevate us on their shoulders. So we did it ourselves. And I think that's been the biggest challenge, but it was also the biggest opportunity.
And the most rewarding part.
It's now the most rewarding part. But if you said to me, if you described to me, if you said, Jessica, I'm going to describe a career path for you over the next 5 years, this is what it looks like, I'd probably be, maybe not so polite and say, really, maybe you can keep it. It's been tough to navigate because nobody really tells you. There's no rule book. No one tells you do, ABC on day 1 and, DEF on day 5. And nobody tells you this. So you have to figure it out yourself. But I think we've done a really good job.
And you've made 12 investments to date. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of those companies? And is there anything in particular that you've looked for that's made you think, I really want to invest in that business?
We can talk all day about our fantastic founders, but I can tell you about a couple of them. Jinesh, I think he was on one of these episodes previously. Now, Jinesh for us is a real standout founder. He displays everything that we really admire in a founder. One of those is, it's the grit and determination, well-used terms, by the way, but actually very few founders really display it continuously. So this ability to never be tired is a sort of, I think we're sort of a bit afraid of saying that these days. And yet he is tireless. And we really appreciate that. The other thing that we look for in founders, and we flip it on its head a little bit, is that it's not so much who we're looking to invest in and who do we want to invest in. It is, Marie and I often think about who we prepared to lose money to, because the statistics for venture capital are what they are. We're not going to have 100% home run on every company that we invest in. Some will not make it, not because of the product or necessarily the founder, but the market environment, the product market fit wasn't right. Some will just not. We know that may happen. We don't wish it on anyone for any VC. So when we come to defend our portfolio and our investment decisions to our investors, that is the question that we have to be able to answer. And Jinesh at Sprive is definitely one of those founders where we believe that if we wake up one morning, we would know and we would feel totally able to defend the reason why we invested in him and his team, by the way, who are equally tireless. So he's a great example. And you know Sprive, so we don't have to go into it. But we have a couple of interesting founders that we've invested in Belfast.
Okay.
And Belfast is a slightly unusual region or devolved nation for venture. Most venture capital funds, there are so many now that are focused in the regions of the UK. But the devolved nations also are a real hotbed of activity. Scotland has its sort of, life sciences focus, and it has a lot of green tech that goes on there. Wales also very focused on its own industries, but Belfast we found or Northern Ireland it's a real gem in the UK.
And are you finding, so if you've got investments in Belfast, are there other parts of the UK that you're looking at? So because venture capital tends to be so London centric, it's great to hear that you've kind of been branching out and looking elsewhere.
We want to. We invest all over the UK. We were in Leeds yesterday, for example, talking to the big angel networks in Leeds who have real strong connectivity with local founders. So founders in the north, founders in Scotland, we're very interested in. But just to touch back on Belfast and to touch back on these founders, we have one company that is developing a technology to disrupt Kevlar. So, Kevlar is a security protection material that's been incumbent for about 60 years. There's been no revolution in that space at all. But Kevlar protects men and women differently. So women have less protection typically than men, particularly stab protection. So this young founder has developed a new 3D printed technology that disrupts Kevlar head on, and it solves that problem completely. So they are talking to all of the big defense and security companies globally, particularly in Asia. And he is a Forbes 30 under 30 based in Belfast mechanical engineer.
Amazing.
So absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And right bang in the middle of the UK government's, industrial strategy.
Yeah.
But 100% sustainable, part of the circular economy, fully recyclable. So, ticks all the boxes. A mechanical engineer, a young lady called Naomi McGregor, who has developed a sports tech technology to help elite teams prevent injury, particularly ACL.
Okay.
And many footballers, particularly those, at elite level, the Manchester Cities, the Arsenals, etc. And I'm talking about men and women's teams really suffer from ACL injury, as you know.
Yeah.
Some of the most expensive players in the world, but also basketball players, ice hockey players, etc. So they've developed a technology which is really gathering ahead of steam to try and help these teams ensure that their best players aren't benched.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And often at the moment, we're hearing so much about how hard it is to raise money. Obviously, there's lots of kind of doom and gloom about markets and Trump tariffs and cost of living crisis, etc. What advice would you give to any founders who might be listening to this who are looking for funding at the moment? What advice would you give to them?
So I think it's a really interesting question because the last statistic I heard was there's something close to $150 billion of dry powder sitting with venture capital funds right this moment. Now, that's not all based in the UK, obviously, but there is no doubt. So, our first fund is fully deployed. Hopefully our second fund will be up and running, fairly quickly so we can get moving on this and be part of the solution. But there is funding available for the right companies.
Yeah.
So, and it's a little bit unfair to say that generally, but I think that Sprive is a very good example of a founder who is not quite at Series A yet, but has managed to raise an equivalent of $7 million for scaling their business, and they're going to scale fast and it's going to be a huge success. So the money is there. The positioning and the focus and the narrative have to match the current geopolitical environment.
Yeah.
Now, we talk about Trump tariffs, we talk about the macro environment. There is no doubt the geopolitical environment is sitting on a tinderbox right now. You can see what happened in India recently. You can see the cyber attacks that are happening on a daily basis in the UK. There is a very dangerous sort of streak of activity that is happening. Having said that, I think that there are some huge opportunities that venture capital funds are really looking towards.
Yeah.
And what I would encourage is founders to look to the various strategies, government-led strategies, particularly in the UK, that the government is focused on, whether it be the creative industries, whether it be green technology, whether it be defense, and marry their narrative and their focus to those kind of strategies. Because I think, venture really wants to follow governments.
Yeah.
They want to follow where governments are really placing their bets.
Yeah.
And, defense, for example, and I'm refraining from saying AI because I think that's very obvious. But defense, for example, is a huge growth industry globally now, because countries all over the world are upping their allocation of spend to defense-led solutions.
Yeah.
So if you are in that space, you're good. You just have to go and find it. You're good.
Yeah.
If you are in the creative industries, the Middle East is exploding in the creator economy. I mean, places like Dubai are giving golden visas for those in the creator economy. So follow those governmental trends. Yeah. And the money will be there.
Great advice. And just to kind of touch on AI, if we can.
Yes.
I don't think we can go through this conversation without, as you just mentioned it. Obviously, it's a buzzword that's everywhere at the moment. And I think we are probably all in agreement that it is part of the future. I see quite a few pitch decks, nowhere near as many as you, I'm sure. What advice would you give to founders who might be thinking about including AI in their propositions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... the technology is here and it's now and it's being used. We all use it. I use it. I have it on my phone. I ask ChatGPT questions. I ask Perplexity. We all use it. We are using it to build decks. We're using it, and founders are using it. So it's here, it's now. The various iterations of where AI goes will only become more ingrained in society. So I think that it is a non-negotiable, for sure. What I would say to founders is that the lens now of AI is not as a separate solution. It's not a separate narrative. It is part and parcel of what you must think about when you're delivering your solution. And for example, we were in Leeds yesterday and there were a number of life sciences companies that were pitching. Some were pitching animal science solutions. And I spoke to one of them and it was all about bovine reproduction and ensuring healthy cattle. And I mean, it's not our space. And I said to the founder, I said, are you using AI technology to speed up your analytics? And she said no. Yeah. And I said, okay, why? Yeah. Well, we already have a product in production and it's already being sold and they are selling it. But this is a real issue because the speed to market, particularly in diagnostics, animal or human, particularly in medicine, particularly in drug discovery, particularly in pharmaceuticals, that is particularly in pathology, that is going to hit hard. I mean, by 2030, people are talking about, a total transformation of diagnosis and people being diagnosed within minutes. Yeah. Not a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Yeah. Or much longer in the case of what's going on at the moment. Exactly. So if you're not integrating AI as a sort of base case, computational or analytical or data processing part of your solution, then you really need to think about it and think about why. Yeah, and embrace change. It's sort of when the calculator came. I mean, I know there are lots of narratives about, people thought it was, oh my God, children will never be able to think for themselves or they'll never be able to add or subtract or multiply. And that, just think about the mathematical ability of our children now versus when the calculator first came. The same thing. Yeah. We are transformed. Yeah. Perfect. And what's your proudest achievement? Big question to date with Two Magnolias. Okay, I'm glad you qualified it because I was going to say my children. No, with Two Magnolias, I mean, raising and closing a first fund when
Yeah.
we were the new kids on the block, that, was a real moment.
Yeah.
That was a high five moment for Marie and I. Investing in 12 fantastic founders who are all doing incredible things and still going strong and really carving, fantastic spaces in their fields. Incredibly proud. We have one proud moment that is about to come, we hope. And when we raise our second fund, I think we can safely say that we have really disrupted
Yeah.
a small part of venture capital. 2 female GPs coming in, building from ground up, I think is something we can be proud of.
Yeah, and inspiration is how I would describe
Oh,
you.
thank you.
And followed your journey closely. And I think it's amazing, as you say, it's a bit of a club. Just seeing the traction that you've been able to make is very impressive. See, with all the founders that you're meeting and investors and various businesses that you're looking at, if you had to say one lesson that you've kind of seen over the last sort of 4 or 5 years of starting this up, that you wish more entrepreneurs or founders knew as they were starting out, what would it be?
I think venture capital investors spend a lot of time telling founders how to run their business or what they should be doing. And I know Marie and I talk about it all the time. We are astonished at the level of intellectual property in the UK, the level of activity in the ecosystem, the level of ambition of our young people coming out of universities. I mean, there's some incredible statistic now that, 15 or 20% of all young graduates have a desire to start a business at some point in their life, which, it means that the UK is really potentially going to take on the US in being a very vibrant place to build and start a business. So we don't really want to be in a position where we're clipping the wings of people who are developing these ideas, and there are ideas that we would never have even thought of. What I would say is just that I think there is an important point of honesty that needs to occur in the minds of everybody when they're looking at founders, from our perspective as well. As a founder, you can have a really good think about why it is you're starting your business. Because there are 2 types of businesses. There are lifestyle businesses, because you really are mission-led and you love what you're doing and you want to run that business for the rest of your life, because you know that you are the person that is going to solve that problem. And from now till the moment you step away, that is your mission. That is one type of business.
Yeah.
There is another type of business, which is, you're fast growing, you have a problem you want to solve, and you want to solve it globally, and you want to grow and scale, and then you want to hand the reins to another organization that might take it on and scale you even further. That is another business.
Yeah.
Venture capital, doesn't fit necessarily in both. There are some VCs that do, lifestyle, long-term So you just have to be a bit careful where you go for your funding, who you're talking to, how you are developing your business over time. I think that's the only piece of advice I would ask founders to think about, because I sometimes feel that that they're led down a path of knocking on 100 VC doors, but that's not the source of the funding they need.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that people jump into going for a fund and maybe they need to be looking at high net worth angels.
Exactly.
And I often describe it to founders and people I'm talking to, it's a marriage. And you don't want to end up heading for divorce. So you gotta kind of make sure that you're all aligned. And I think it's really important what you just said, that, and also it's not for everyone raising money. It's a weird thing. I remember when I got my funding into my company, I must have checked the bank account every single day for the first 6 months, to the point my partner was like, what are you going to do if one day it's not there? But you feel this responsibility.
Of course, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And we talked about it yesterday in sort of a broad room of a lot of VCs and a lot of founders. It was, you're always fundraising.
Yes.
So you're never off. There's never an off switch. So I talked to our founders. I mean, we've got fantastic founder, Laura, who runs Seep. She's an incredible founder, huge gravitas in her field. And, we have this discussion all the time. She's constantly fundraising. We know another one of our companies, the Better Menopause, Joanna, the CEO, she's been fundraising for the last few months also. So it's a constant cycle of talking to, even when you don't need the money, you're talking to people who can give you money because you never know when you need the money. We're doing it too. We're constantly fundraising. So it is not for everyone. And also, one thing we have to not to discount, the grants in this country are incredible. There are many grant giving organizations who actually are very good at funding research and R&D and intuitive ideas that are not yet kind of fully formed. And then there are lots of foundations that want to invest in mission-led.
Yeah.
So
there's lots of different options.
Lots of different options.
It's finding out
yeah.
the right route for you.
Absolutely.
It's widely spoken about and completely shocking, the statistics around the amount of money that's going to women and to underrepresented founders. I think it was 2%, but actually it's dropped lower than that last year. What do you think is going to drive change? It's talked about a lot, but what do you think we need to see from the industry perspective over the next year, 2 years, that's really going to move the dial?
Well, I think, this is right in my wheelhouse. We are right in the middle of this, and we're right in the middle of this conversation. So there are two things. Firstly, it's a public-private partnership that's going to change things. And I think change is starting to happen. I'll talk about that in a minute. But just with regards to the statistics, I think that from what I understand, people who were in venture capital 10 years ago have been quoting the same statistics, or were quoting the same statistics. So nothing has moved in 10 years. So those people who were in venture capital for 10 years, we were in VC for the last 3, we're all responsible for that. We feel responsible. So, and by taking responsibility, we have to understand what it is that we are doing that is causing this. Now, last year, when the amplification of female voices in VC and senior females in VC was at its loudest, the numbers fell. Now, it was really interesting. So we were sort of thinking, why could this be? But what was last year? Last year was a high-risk year. It was a high-risk year geopolitically. We had several, we had like almost 60 national elections worldwide. The US had election. The UK had election. Many people went on hold. The investor community went on hold for a long time. 6 months of last year was wiped out because of, particularly in the UK. Now, what was really interesting is that some companies still got funded. But, 98% of them were not single female teams. So what we've heard anecdotally is actually, because of that level of risk, when it's a high-risk geopolitical environment or global macro environment, people reduce risk. Yeah. And we know that because from where we came from big global macro trading rooms. And when they reduce risk, they take out the riskiest businesses. And there is no doubt, and actually all the academic evidence suggests this. You could look at Harvard Business Review studies of female founders. Female founders get hit first because they're seen as more risky. And people may say, no, that's not true. That can't be the case. Well, the evidentially it is. Yeah. So I think that the way in which female founders are questioned, the way in which they're approached, the narrative that occurs, tell me about your product. Why is, how big is the market? Are you sure the market's that big? What, your product is risky, isn't it? Or your business, what are the risk factors associated with your product? So that type of questioning, that type of approach is something that is anecdotally discussed a lot amongst underrepresented founders. As female GPs, we reject that, because we don't operate in that space. And we're very aware that may or may be the case. So I think that is an important point to recognise that at a micro level, subconsciously, that is what has happened and that is what is happening. But the good news is, from a macro perspective, the Investing in Women Task Force, which was started by the last government but is now totally embraced by this government, led by Debbie Wasco and Hannah Bernard, in conjunction with the Treasury, in conjunction with Rachel Reeves, is totally transforming the narrative. So they have raised 250 million sterling that is going to female-led funds and female-led GP teams. We hopefully will be, one of the many recipients of some of that funding at some point.
Yeah.
Bootstrap is the fund of funds that's going to be in charge of apportioning that fund. So that is very good news. And I think once we rebalance VC, once the numbers change, once there's an even keel of GPs and a broad church of ideas and diversity of thought, then I think the numbers will automatically change. The big picture, the really big win, is when the pension funds in the UK decide that they are ready to start moving their money into alternatives.
Yeah.
I think the Mansion House campaign, that's already happening. It's a little trickle from what we understand. But over the next 3 years, the floodgates have to open. And once even a small portion of that DC contribution pot comes into venture in the UK, the numbers will change. They will change overnight.
Yeah, and that's what an exciting time.
It's a brilliantly exciting time for us in the UK.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that when you and Marie started out, it was like ground zero again. So I'd love to kind of hear more about, in that moment when you realise, you've had these investment banking careers, all those connections, made capital of your own, and suddenly you're throwing yourselves into a new industry, having to build those connections and relationships. What did you do first, and what advice would you give to anyone who feels like they don't have the network, they don't have the capital at the moment, and they're not sure where to turn?
Yeah, it's difficult. And there's no question that building the network was the critical point. The one skill that we both had coming out of where we had been is we had come from a broad network, as you said, and a wide, big group of people that we knew, but we'd also developed over time. But we were also used to building networks. So when we came in, we weren't afraid at all of reaching out to people. And we reached out to many, many people across many industries, legal, accounting, industry bodies. We just reached out to lots of people. Some doors never opened.
Yeah.
And some doors opened very widely because people were willing to have those conversations. And the moment you meet one and then suddenly the dispersion is you meet one, you then meet five, and then those five turn into 25, and those, you suddenly can accelerate your network very quickly. And people are very keen to, some people are very keen to share their own experiences. So Marie and I are very keen. If people want to reach out to us, we're very open. Sometimes we miss things, obviously, and but we are active on LinkedIn. I know lots of people don't read their LinkedIn messages. We try to read as many as possible. We try to respond. People who want to have coffees, have chats about VC, we're very open. I think the industry is changing now. So I think the door is a little. Do you feel that yourself?
I do, and I think from my experience with networking, I've always been an avid networker, and I think that that's been the most powerful thing for me, and I think it is for most people. But I also think that sometimes when a door's closed for whatever reason, I remember it was actually Debbie Wasco. It was one of her sayings that really struck me. Is it's not a no, it's a not for now.
Yes.
Potentially for that person. It might be a not for now for a long time, and that turns into a never. But I've really noticed that there were lots of conversations I had in my kind of marching round pitching my wealth management company, which didn't go anywhere. And now those people circle back round and are kind of watching what you're doing and more interested in being open to conversation. You have to keep nurturing your network.
I think so. And I think you can't be afraid of of the conversation. I think so. You need to be a bit fearless.
Yeah.
And we are definitely, Marie and I are definitely fearless. We're fearless women. So we grew up, being in trading rooms in 2019 was one thing. Being in a trading room in the early 90s was a very different thing, So we were in male-dominated environments. It was, kind of the Wild West a little bit. There was a little bit of kind of banter, between sort of genders that it definitely doesn't exist anymore. But we, worked through that, and we grew broad shoulders, and we kind of grew these, skins of confidence.
Yeah.
So you have to be a little bit fearless, even if you're crying inside.
Yeah.
You have to kind of go for it and throw yourself in. And then once you've had one conversation like this, for example, it magnifies.
Yeah, exactly. Stepping away from kind of investment and business and finding out a little bit more about you, is there any sort of routine or habit that you have that you've adopted over your career, and particularly since launching your business, that's helped you get through?
It sounds a bit simple, but I walk my dog.
Yeah.
So now you might say, well, you have to walk your dog. And I do have to walk my dog. We've had a dog since my youngest was quite young. I mean, we've had a couple. And it's interesting, when I stopped work and I sort of had to ground myself in a routine. When you were when I was getting up at, 5:45 in the morning and leaving home at 6:30 and coming back at 7 at night, I had a routine, and everything was clockwork, and where were the kids? There was no space, there was no oxygen. So coming out of that into, you don't have a routine, you're all at sea. So you have to ground yourself in something. And I choose to ground myself in open spaces, and the sort of 45 minutes I have for myself, or an hour that I have for myself in the mornings, and it can be at any time in the morning, depending if I'm rushing off to meetings. It's an incredibly interesting time, because it's just you and your thoughts, and all of your worst kind of decisions that you have to make, or the kind of the fears that you have, really hit you, because there's no one else around. And I actually of course I walk with friends, etc., but I really like walking alone, because then there's no interruption in your train of thought. Sometimes you get fantastic ideas, but sometimes you really have to face the fact that, oh my goodness, is that email coming, or I'm going to have to send that email, or I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to confront. And so I have turned that into a necessity, into that's my meditative time. That is my time when I step away from everyone, step away from, my kids, step away from my family, step away from everyone. And I'm just confronting all of the thoughts that are in my head.
I love that. And I think that, you get such clarity when sometimes there's so much noise, and we're always kind of distracted by phones or people and emails coming in and all the various devices and ways of communicating, that it's just so overwhelming. And sometimes you just need to take a moment out. And
exactly. And, it's quite interesting, because we're very rarely without our phones for an hour. I mean, this is just actually such a brilliant conversation, because we're not looking at our phones and checking emails and etc. When you walk the dog, I mean, I do occasionally see people checking their phone when they're walking their dog. I don't, know, I mean, very rarely do, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, but I go into a zone where I'm really, I sort of practice that shutting everything out. And I don't, to the point where I don't even, people say, oh, I listen to a podcast. I do podcasts and things separately.
Perfect. And if you had to kind of pinpoint one, what do you think your magic spark has been throughout your career and now going into business? I think I can probably, from this discussion, which I've loved, give you one. But what's
then? You give me one and I'll give you one.
I think it's, I love the word fearless that you've been using, and the way that you've put yourself out there and gone for it. So that will be my take home from today.
Yeah. So that is, I think both of us are fearless, and both of us are very, we live full lives. And so one of the things that I actually hold very dear to me is something that my father said to me, actually, which we sometimes forget. And it's, that expression, life is short. So you've
Yeah.
got to run fast, and that's your kind of thing. You run fast because life is short. Actually, and I say this to people, actually life is long. If you have the privilege of having a long life, and you have a privilege of waking up every morning, and you're kind of, a year from start to finish is actually long. I know we say it's short and the years seem like they're going faster, but actually it's long. And so you've got to kind of really enjoy every single moment. The way in which I look at life is just fill it.
Yeah.
Just absolutely fill it with as much as you can possibly do, because it's long. So you've got plenty of opportunity. And that's kind of the magic, I think, that for me, that I hold dear, and that I don't think about time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been so great talking to you this afternoon.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.